Mental illness is a family affair. 1 in 4 of us is affected by mental illness in one way or another. I'm sure that's been said many times this morning. If we lived in a completely stigma-free world, I would ask all of you sitting here today to raise your hand if you suffer from or know someone who suffers from a mental illness, and more likely than not, 1 in 4 of you would raise your hand without fear or shame. Or, because many in this room are passionate advocates for the mentally ill, more than 1 of you would raise your hand. I'm not going to ask that question, but I just want you to keep it in mind. Anything that affects 1 in 4 of your constituents has to be given serious thought, because lack of serious thought, coupled with serious action, will result in disastrous consequences, many of which have been touched on by this morning's distinguished panelists. My sister Jessie and I came here today simply to talk about our family. Jessie and I are the 12th generation of a stiff upper-lipped, pull up your socks, do it, don't talk about it, for God's sake, don't show anything, suck it up, work hard, don't complain, make money, don't spend it, always polish your shoes, Connecticut Yankees, with absolutely no vocabulary for mental illness. It was simply not an option. Going to a psychiatrist was unthinkable. I mean, we were from Greenwich, Connecticut, not from New York. When I actually moved into New York to start my career in the theater, there were still a lot of mentally ill people on the streets. There were several who were regulars in the theater district, and I became very fond of them. There was Celia, who would accost me on the street, "Miss Close! Miss Close!" And a tall, balding guy in a raincoat who was always outside the stage door rocking back and forth. "Are you an actress?" I'd feel sorry for them and sometimes laugh at them. But even though they could also make me feel strangely guilty and uncomfortable, theirs was a separate universe that I never really thought about. It had nothing to do with me. My career took off. I played several characters who in many ways perpetrated the stigma around mental illness. Cruella is, she's just the devil. But mainly Alex Forrest in Fatal Attraction, who was terrifying and violent, and everybody said was crazy. But even then, in my research with psychiatrists, I didn't interpret her behavior as that of someone suffering from a mental illness, which in retrospect was undoubtedly true. Mental illness had nothing to do with me. I didn't see much of my family. During all her teenage years and into adulthood, my sister Jess was considered the wild one. She walked out of school in 9th grade and refused to go back. She tried to kill herself with pills when she was 16, married an abusive boy when she was 17, tried to kill herself again when she was 19, and still, unbelievably, the idea that she might be something other than irresponsible never occurred to my family. Jessie will tell you about her journey. You could say all the dirty stuff. She was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and her son, Kaylin, with schizoaffective disorder. So I decided to do something, and to use all my nonprofit time to help fight the stigma and discrimination around mental illness. And my education began. I went into Fountain House in New York City and was welcomed into a community run by consumers whose vision is that people with mental illness everywhere can achieve their potential and be accepted and respected as co-workers, neighbors, and friends. In Fountain House, I was able to look into the faces of the members and to check my own quotient of stigma. And there was some there. I was shocked because mental illness is uncomfortable. All the cliches come into play. I actually wondered if becoming an outspoken advocate would affect my career. When thoughts like that go through my head, maybe it's my Connecticut Yankeeism, I ask myself, what's the alternative? To do nothing because you're afraid? I find that unacceptable. So just about 3 years ago, a group of us started Bring Change to Mind. Today we have a community of nearly 20,000 on our Facebook pages and website, bringchangetomind.org. We are partnered with most of the organizations represented in this room and more, part of the growing army of voices determined to make a difference. Mental illness is an integral part of the human condition. 1 in 4, what a staggering statistic. We ignore it at our peril.
My name is Jessie Close, and I have lived with bipolar disorder since I was a teenager. I medicated myself with drugs and alcohol until I came close to killing myself the 3rd time in 2001. I found AA that year and have been clean and sober for 10.5 years now. But even clean and sober, my episodes of depression and mania, accompanied by suicidal ideation, continued. Thanks to the concern and generosity of my family, I was properly diagnosed at McLean Hospital in 2004. When I look back, I shudder at the memories of how I was. I can mourn now for the out-of-control me, the me who tried to kill myself at 16 and then again at 19, who destroyed everything good in my life with the highs and lows, the confusion and grief I felt after a destructive manic episode that usually sent a husband or lover running, and the just got through it by the skin of my teeth after a dangerous depressive episode. I am now 58 years old and so very grateful to modern medications, McLean Hospital, and my family that have kept me alive and thriving. I gave my eldest son, Kalen, something no one would ever want to give away. I gave him the DNA that contributed to schizoaffective disorder. He was admitted to McLean Hospital at age 19. During the time Kalen was at McLean Hospital, my bipolar illness became much worse. I lost yet another relationship because I was cycling very fast and had become delusional. I would sit in my armchair and wait for Kalen to show up in his gray truck. In my addled brain, he would jump out and rush to the house and give me a big hug and tell me it was all a nightmare. I would sit as though paralyzed and run that scenario over and over in my mind. I began to not be able to take the garbage out or even get in the car to buy groceries without an enormous mental push. My young daughter, Maddie, needed my care, and because of her presence, I persevered. I finally got the help I needed to get me over the hump from a neurologist and a psychiatrist in Salt Lake City. Glenn flew out from New York and stayed with me for the appointments. She is a dear sister. With help through those first difficult weeks, it seems much more likely that someone dealing with a mental illness will be successful, meaning that they will stay on their medication. I was thoroughly miserable on my own trying to take care of Maddie, but then, as I was sitting outside on a beautiful afternoon, I felt a tiny spark, and that spark grew, and I stopped feeling so tired and sick, and life came back to me. And I was actually able to smile and laugh again, and get into the car without too much trouble. I have left a flattened path of houses, cars, and husbands. I honestly don't know how many cars I've traded in after only a year, but once I discovered balloon payments, I was all over it. Houses were more trouble to get ready, and inevitably, once they were all cleaned up and ready for the marketplace, my mood would change and I'd want to stay. But husbands were the most trouble. I only had 5. It's much easier to keep track of husbands. My last preferred my mania's super sexual mood and chose to leave when he found me paralyzed by depression, lying on our shoes in the closet. So now that I've filled my quota, now that I don't get manic anymore is really the key, I'm thrilled to live only with dogs. Any correlation you may make is strictly yours. Mental illness is not easy to spot in the beginning. There are no commonly known warning signs. Many of us have no idea what's going on. There are still many faces who close up at the mention of mental illness. It's the people who make ugly remarks. It's these people we want to educate. I have to cite a battle cry from Winston Churchill. He said, "The only way through hell is to keep going through hell." Dealing with a mental illness is like going through hell. Not having the right help is going through hell. Your family may not be able to help, which is hell. Returning from war and ending up on the streets is hell. Hoping that the Senate and Congress understand that you need help but won't help is hell. We don't need hell on this earth in this country. Let's make it easier for the mentally ill. Let's make sure this government hears us. Let's stop going through hell and turn our hell into a bit of heaven on earth. Thank you.